These.
Yes.
You used to have a big black bag of these.
Yeah, I don't have the big black bag anymore. I just put them all in the top drawer. It might be the second drawer in the big armoire in my room. The big cabinet.
Oh.
Okay, so I hope that you did put some thought into that. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it at the moment because I'm going to go into resistance training first, which is what we're getting into today, so that I can include that on the list of how resistance training is going to affect performance in each of those areas. Okay, but does anybody have anything they want to ask me about before I move into resistance training?
Can I see what was written on the whiteboard so I can screenshot it really quick?
These were just what causes increase in plasma because I apparently skipped it.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Okay, so we're moving into chapter 10, which is resistance training. So chapter 11 was adaptations to training. We started with endurance training. We filled out this table. And then we talked about anaerobic training, specifically high intensity interval training. Oh, and by the way, with this table is very important. Okay, usually I've got like 40 points worth of questions from this table on the final. So what I usually suggest is you come into class for the final being able to fill out this table from blank. Okay, so my suggestion for how to get yourself to that point is print out a bunch of blank ones, sit down with a blank one, fill it in to the best of your ability without your notes, then go back and look at your notes and finish filling it in. Do that over and over and over and over again is how you actively study this, okay, as opposed to continuously reading over the one that's already written, okay? In addition to that, I suggest you fill one out really, really neatly and laminate it and keep it, because this is basically exercise physiology in a nutshell, and it's also going to be helpful in 446. Okay, so keep that and spend some time on it. Okay, I don't know if I'll have that many questions on it on this final because I'm shifting this final a bit, but there's definitely going to be questions on it. It's important. Okay, so chapter 10 is resistance training. When I talk about resistance training, I'm generally talking about heavy resistance training for the purposes of strength and hypertrophy. If you're doing lighter weights and more reps, it's not going to be the same adaptations as if you're doing heavy weights. So I'm assuming heavy weights, low reps meaning 12 or less. I don't know if you guys have studied ACSM guidelines for reps and resistance for hypertrophy and strength yet. Have you guys studied that in any class? Not yet. So it's beyond the scope of this class, so it's not something I'm going to talk a whole lot about. But I just want to emphasize, if you're doing more than 12 reps, you're not going to see a whole lot of increase in strength or hypertrophy. You really need to be doing 12 reps or less. And when I say doing 12 reps or less, I mean maxing out at 12 reps or less. If you're stopping at 10 because Fleck said to do 10 reps, if you're stopping at 10, but you could actually do 15, you're doing what's called nothing. You're not challenging yourself. Okay, in order to get an adaptation from the training, it has to be a challenge, it has to be an overload. So if I say I want you to do 10 reps of an exercise, that means you should have a heavy enough weight that you could not do an 11th rep. You're maxing out, failing at 10. If you fail at 9, I'm happy. Okay, so if I give you a rep limit, I want you to fail by that rep, or at least not be able to do another rep. So if you're stopping at 10, but you could do 15, you're not going to get anything from that. Make sense? Okay. So that being said, give me some reasons why someone should do resistance training. Just throw out some reasons.
To build muscle.
Okay. Why would someone want to build muscle?
Aesthetics.
Okay, that's a good reason. Common reason.
Injury prevention.
Absolutely. Anything else?
Recovery, bone strength too.
Increases bone density. Improve recovery from injuries, for sure.
Increase speed.
Okay. So increased speed is going to come with the increased strength, right? So we might do resistance training to improve our strength, which is going to improve our speed and power, which we talked about, which relates to, it could relate to sports performance, right? So sports performance would be another reason to do resistance training. Can you think of anything else?
Burn more calories.
Okay,
Or increase
so increased metabolism, meaning the workout itself is not burning necessarily a lot of calories. You don't necessarily burn a whole lot of calories when you do resistance training workout, but we talked about the amount of muscle mass you have affecting your metabolic rate, right? So someone who has a higher muscle mass, higher amount of muscle mass is going to have a higher resting metabolic rate. They're going to burn more calories at rest. So is this good or bad for someone who's interested in weight loss?
Good.
Good.
Because it's going to raise their metabolic rate. But it's important to understand that what might happen if you have someone who is trying to lose weight and they do resistance training, the weight on the scale might go up because if they're gaining muscle. Okay, so remember that someone who wants to lose weight doesn't necessarily want to lose weight, they want to lose fat specifically. So if your fat level stays the same and your muscle mass increases, that's an improvement in your body composition, right? That's going to be a decrease in percent fat, even if your fat stays the same and your muscle goes up. And then over time, having that increased muscle mass is going to increase your metabolic rate so that you burn more calories every day at rest. So it's going to help decrease the weight in the long run, but initially it's going to help with body composition more than with weight. That's an important thing to be aware of.
So you suggest that it's more cardio for the person who's trying to lose weight? No?
No, they should definitely be doing resistance training. What I'm saying is it's more important to look at the body composition changes than the number on the scale. The
Okay.
number on the scale is not necessarily going to reflect fat loss. It's going to reflect weight, which is affected by muscle. Okay, so those are some good reasons. Let's look at some specific populations. So women, for example, should women be doing resistance training?
Yes.
Why?
Yes.
Cindy, why?
Even
For all kinds of reasons. Off the top of my head, I would think, as women get older, our rate of osteoporosis increases quicker than men, and it helps to prevent that.
Yes, I agree with that. Anything else?
Are you still asking me?
Oh, no, anybody?
Could you repeat the question?
Should women be doing strength training and why?
Every reason a man does.
Thank you. So all of the reasons that we listed apply to women. Okay, we can't apply all of those reasons to men and say women should just do it for bone density. They can do it for aesthetics. They can do it for sports performance. They can do it for body composition control, injury prevention, bone density. All those reasons apply across the board, men and women. Okay, what about the elderly? Should the elderly be doing resistance training?
Yes.
Yes, why?
Same reasons.
All the same reasons apply. Every single one of them. Yes, even sports performance. My father-in-law competed in the Masters Olympics until he was probably late 80s. You can still improve your sports performance. You can still increase your strength, aesthetics, all those things still apply. Okay, I would add some additional reasons why the elderly should be doing resistance training: to improve activities of daily living, maintain independence, reduce the risk of falling, right? In this population, the risk of falling is devastating. Not even, I mean, the fall itself could be devastating, but the risk, the fear of falling is devastating, right? So the elderly population often don't do things because they're afraid of falling. So if they're doing resistance training, it's going to reduce the likelihood they're going to fall by increasing their strength, balance, coordination, all of those types of things. It's going to decrease their chance of injury if they do fall, and it's going to improve their recovery if they do fall. Okay, so all those are reasons to do it. If a person can no longer carry their groceries from their car to their house, that's going to affect their independence, right? So doing resistance training is going to make them able to stay independent longer, improving their activities of daily life. Okay, so these are important reasons for that population to be doing some kind of resistance training. Okay, it's not obviously not going to be as heavy in most cases as a younger person, but as long as they're doing some kind of overload, they can get stronger, or at the very least minimize their losses of strength. Okay, one more population. How about children? Should children be doing resistance training?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, why?
All the same reasons.
All the same reasons.
I mean, except the hypertrophy, right? That doesn't kick
Okay,
later.
so there we have to define children. Are we talking about an 18-month-old? Are we talking about a 3-year-old, 8-year-old, 12-year-old, 17-year-old? Okay, we can't lump those people all into the same category. So usually we draw the line at puberty because you won't get the same responses to resistance training pre-puberty and post-puberty because hormonal differences. So in order to get hypertrophy type adaptations, you need the hormones. So that really doesn't happen a whole lot till after puberty. So resistance training before puberty, you can get some increases in strength, but you won't see a lot of hypertrophy. So usually at that age, it's more body weight exercises, natural play type activities, monkey bars, you know, they can do pull-ups, push-ups, body weight, things like that. Introducing resistance will be more beneficial after the person has gone through hypertrophy, gone through puberty, so they can see the hypertrophy, which will give them more increases. But once we hit that point, all of the same reasons apply. Body composition control, sports performance, injury prevention, bone density, aesthetics, all those things apply, okay? And I would add to this population additional reasons for them to do resistance training to create a habit. Because if you tell a teenager, you're too young to go to the gym, you're too young to go to the gym, and then they graduate high school, move out and go to college, you can't say, okay, well, why aren't you exercising? Well, it's never been a part of their schedule. It's never been a priority. They probably don't know what to do when they go into a gym, so it's very intimidating. Whereas if you have a teenager who regularly has that part of their routine, it's a priority, it's part of their scheduling, it's natural, they know what to do when they're in there, then they're more likely to do it once they move out or become an adult, right? So a more active child / adolescent is more likely to become an active adult. Okay, so building that habit at a young age is important for the future of our adults, right? And keep in mind though, if you're talking about a younger or a smaller person, most machines are not built for smaller bodies. So it'll be hard for a younger person to work on machines. So they're more likely to use free weights, in which case they need a significant amount of guidance to make sure they're doing the exercises correctly and safely. But I would say that's true for an adult who's a new exerciser, is going to need significant guidance to make sure they're doing the exercises correctly. So that's not necessarily specific to a child, but any new exerciser must learn the form and things like that. Okay, a lot of people think that adolescents shouldn't be doing resistance training because they're afraid it's going to affect their growth. And people all refer to gymnasts all the time. Like, gymnasts are very muscular, but they're very short. Their growth has been stunted. And research has shown that it's not resistance training necessarily that can affect growth. Gymnasts actually don't do that much resistance training. Most of the things they do are body weight, but they do a lot of impact exercises. So resistance has shown that it's more the impact, the repeated impact, that affects the growth more than resistance training. Okay, any questions on any of those populations? Okay, so within actual resistance training, the expectation is that we're going to get increases in strength and hypertrophy. So the question is, can we separate those two things? Is it possible to get strength without hypertrophy? And is it possible to get hypertrophy without strength? Let's start with strength without hypertrophy. Do you think it's possible to get strength without hypertrophy?
I want to say yes.
I
It
agree.
is. It is. Do you think it's possible to get hypertrophy without strength?
Yes.
It is both. Okay, so we're going to go over both of those things and the mechanisms behind them. Okay, so first of all, if you take someone who's never done resistance training before and they start a resistance training program, they're going to see increases in strength pretty quickly, but not necessarily increases in hypertrophy. There's not a lot of hypertrophy that happens in the beginning, but there's an increase in strength. I'm going to tell you exactly how that works. Okay, so this is within the first, let's say, 8 weeks of a training program for a new exerciser. So these are neural adaptations. Okay, these occur in the first 8 weeks of a resistance training program. And it will cause increases in strength without hypertrophy. Okay. So, first one, I'm going to go over 3 different ones. First one is increased synchronization and recruitment of motor units. Increased synchronization and recruitment of motor units. Sydney, what is a motor unit?
An alpha motor neuron and all the muscle fibers it innervates.
Good, this is going way back, beginning of the semester, right? One alpha motor neuron and all the fibers it innervates. So recruitment of motor units means once you start resistance training, you're going to be accessing motor units that you weren't really accessing before. And the synchronization means that you're going to get them to fire together in a coordinated fashion. So an untrained person would fire their motor units in almost a chaotic way. It's not organized. So with resistance training, your neurological system learns to fire the motor units together. If you can fire the motor units together, that's going to come across to you as an increase in strength. I can lift something heavier than I could before. Not because of hypertrophy, but because of just a neural adaptation that has allowed you to coordinate the firing of your motor units together. Okay, stop me if you have a question. Second neural adaptation is rate coding. Rate coding has to do with the frequency of firing. So remember, so now we have to go back to think about the initiation and propagation of the action potential. So remember, we had the resting membrane potential, we have the brain sending graded potentials, which through summation cause the action potential. Sodium rushes in, we depolarize, we send the action potential. Potassium exits, now we're hyperpolarized. Can the neuron respond to another signal coming in while it's hyperpolarized? It cannot. So in order to get the neuron to fire more frequently, we have to shorten that refractory period. The amount of time we spend in hyperpolarization has got to decrease. So we can allow the neuron to respond to another signal more quickly so that the neuron can fire more rapidly. Okay, so that happened, that's called an increase in rate coding, which occurs as a result of resistance training. Okay, the neuron can fire more frequently. Third neural adaptation is called disinhibition, which kind of sounds like a double negative, and it kind of is. disinhibition. So the inhibition here refers to the inhibition of a muscle contraction, or the canceling or preventing of a muscle contraction. We talked about 2 reflexes we have that cause inhibition. What are they?
Inorganic phosphate.
That's not a reflex.
Autogenic
Oh,
inhibition.
no.
Autogenic inhibition and
Reciprocal inhibition?
reciprocal inhibition. One of them is going to help us contract the muscle, and one of us is going to prevent us from contracting the muscle. Which one is going to prevent us from contracting the muscle?
Autogenic inhibition.
Autogenic inhibition with a contraction stimulus. Okay, so we got to go way back again. Pull this information out of the depth of your memory. Okay, Esmeralda, can you explain autogenic inhibition with a contraction stimulus?
Is it the one that's combined? There's like two things combined.
Well, I think you're thinking of the stretch stimulus one that goes with the stretch reflex. I'm talking about the contraction stimulus. Caroline, do you remember? Jasmine, do you remember?
The brain sends a signal to the alpha motor neuron to depolarize it, and then it causes the muscle to relax.
If you're depolarizing, it doesn't cause relaxation.
Oh, it causes the maximal contraction.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Golgi tendon
Organ.
I just remember GTO. Senses the maximal contraction and causes the depolarization, hyperpolarization of the alpha motor neuron, which then causes the relaxation of the muscle.
Perfect. Does that sound familiar, guys? All this stuff is going to come back and get integrated here. Okay, so autogenic inhibition with a contraction stimulus is what limits your 1 rep max, right? It shuts down your muscle during a maximal contraction. So it determines how much resistance you can lift one time. It's your 1 rep max, which is our measure of strength. Okay, so if you start doing resistance training, what happens is it desensitizes your GTO, makes your GTO less sensitive. That will cause you to be able to lift more weight before the GTO shuts you down. That's an increase in your 1 rep max. That's an increase in strength, right? So the GTO, part of the GTO's job is to decide how much force you can produce before it's going to get injured. And if it thinks that you're trying to produce too much force, it's going to shut you down. So if we make it less sensitive, it allows you to produce more force before it sends that inhibitory signal. So that's an increase in strength, not from hypertrophy, but from desensitization of the GTO, or decreasing autogenic inhibition with the contraction stimulus, making it happen later. Does everybody understand that? Okay, so these are neural adaptations that occur in the first 8 weeks of resistance training for a new exerciser. Okay, if you've been resistance training, let's say when we're in school, you're normally going to the SRC and lifting weights 3 times a week. That's your normal pattern. And now that everything's shut down, you're home and you've stopped lifting because you don't have access to any weights. In the fall, hopefully we go back to the SRC and you start lifting again. You're not starting over at ground zero. You've already gotten these neural adaptations. They're going to stay with you for the most part during this time off. Okay, so when you go back, you can go basically straight back to hypertrophy. You've already gotten these neural adaptations. Okay, so this is for a new exerciser who hasn't done resistance training before. First 8 weeks or so of training, they will see a lot of increases in strength, not a lot of hypertrophy. There might see a little bit of hypertrophy, but most of the increases in strength are coming from neural adaptations. After that, most of the increases in strength will come from hypertrophy. Okay, so let's talk about hypertrophy. We're gonna have two types of hypertrophy. Transient or acute hypertrophy. And then chronic. Okay, so the transient or acute hypertrophy, as the name suggests, is temporary. Okay, this is the hypertrophy you get during or immediately after your resistance training workout. So if you lift heavy, you know the feeling of, it feels like you're bigger when you walk out of the gym than you were when you walked in. That pumped feeling, right? I'm pumped, I'm swole, that's a real thing. It's transient hypertrophy. It's from fluid going into your muscle. So your muscles actually are bigger when you're done with your workout than they were when you started. But it doesn't stay very long, maybe an hour or two, not very long. But that's why, like a fitness model, if they're doing a photo shoot, we'll have some weights on hand and we'll do some reps before they take the photos because they want that pumped look, okay? It's a real thing. Chronic hypertrophy is what we normally talk about hypertrophy, where it's an actual increase in the size of the muscle as a result of regular training. Okay, so this is not going to happen after one workout. This is going to happen with chronic training several times a week over an extended period of time. You will see hypertrophy as your adaptation. Okay, so we've already mentioned that in response to the other types of anaerobic training. So we're going to go a little bit more into detail here on what's causing the hypertrophy. Okay, there are 4 different factors that contribute to hypertrophy. One can be an increase in actin and myosin filaments. So this is what we all usually assume hypertrophy is coming from, an increase in actin and myosin filaments. So if you have more actin and myosin, you can produce more cross bridges and more power strokes, which means you can produce more force. Okay, so this is how hypertrophy leads to an increase in strength or force production. Okay, we can also have an increase in myofibrils. What's a myofibril?
A muscle fiber?
Sarcomeres.
It's a long chain of
Sarcomeres.
Okay, so let's go way back to day 1. Okay, on this drawing, what color is the muscle fiber?
Green.
It's green. This whole thing is the muscle belly, right? The entire biceps muscle or whatever it is. That entire biceps muscle has many, many fibers in it. Okay, what is the red circle?
Fascicle.
Fascicle, which is a bundle of fibers. The fiber is made up of, what's this?
Sarcomeres.
Well, this whole thing is a myofibril, and the myofibril is made up of
Sarcomeres.
a long chain of sarcomeres. Okay, so with chronic hypertrophy, you're getting more myofibrils. So that means you're packing more myofibrils within this fiber. Within all these fibers, you're gonna get more myofibrils, okay? Which goes along with the actin and myosin filaments, okay? Because you have to increase your actin and myosin to increase your myofibrils. That's what they're made of. So therefore, more actin and myosin, more cross bridges, more power strokes, more force production, okay? What's not happening is you're not growing new fibers, okay? You're just keeping the fibers you have, and they're becoming more densely packed with myofibrils. Okay, so if you were to grow new fibers, it would be a fiber that's like getting split into 2 fibers. So then you'd end up with more fibers than you did before. That's called hyperplasia. Hyperplasia is when you end up with more fibers. Okay, it's growing a new fiber, which is basically from splitting one fiber. So hyperplasia has been shown to happen in cats when cats do their resistance training. So yes, the researchers have cats doing resistance training. They train them that they have to push on a lever to get their food. So then they make the lever harder and harder to push down. So the cats end up doing resistance training, and they have seen that cats respond to resistance training with hyperplasia. They have more fibers than they did before. That's not really shown to happen in humans. Back when I was in grad school, they said absolutely not, no hyperplasia in humans. Now the research is starting to say maybe it's possible, and in some extreme cases we could see hyperplasia in humans. Maybe 20 years from now they're going to be saying, yes, this is how you get hyperplasia. But right now it's like generally we don't get hyperplasia in humans, possibly in extreme cases. Okay, mostly what's happening is hypertrophy and not hyperplasia. Okay, so while we're here on this drawing, what's the membrane covering the entire muscle belly?
Acromegaly,
Okay, membrane covering the fascicle,
paramecium,
and membrane covering the fiber.
endomecium.
Okay, good. Okay, another cause of hypertrophy could be increased sarcoplasm. Where in this drawing of the muscle is the sarcoplasm? It's not on the drawing, I haven't drawn it specifically, but where would it be?
Is it in between? It's in between the muscle fibers, right?
Right, so the sarcoplasm is the jelly-like substance that the fibers are floating in. This is where the calcium is released into. Remember, from the sarcoplasmic reticulum, we stimulate the sarcoplasmic reticulum, it releases calcium into the sarcoplasm. So now the calcium is floating around the fiber and it can attach to the troponin, okay? It's also where glycolysis takes place. It's also where the ATP-PCR system takes place, in the sarcoplasm. Okay, so one of the things that can happen as a response to resistance training is an increase in your sarcoplasm. The increase in sarcoplasm is not going to contribute to increases in strength. It's only the increases in actins and myosin and the myofibrils that contribute to an increase in strength, because those give you cross bridges and power strokes. The increase in sarcoplasm does not give you that. So an increase in sarcoplasm still gives you hypertrophy because it's an increase in size, but it's an increase in size without strength. So this is how it's possible to get increases in size without getting increases in strength, because the increases in your size are due to sarcoplasmic hypertrophy as opposed to myofibrillar hypertrophy. Okay, so there are different ways to train to trigger those two different types of development, which you talk more about in 417, but this is like, if you think about the differences between a power lifter and a bodybuilder, a power lifter cares about how much force they can produce. They care about lifting the maximum amount of weight possible. A bodybuilder only cares about size. Bodybuilder doesn't care how much weight they lift. They don't care about strength. They only care about size. A power lifter cares about strength. So a training system for a power lifter looks different than a training system for a bodybuilder. Because a bodybuilder is okay with developing their sarcoplasm, and a powerlifter is not. Okay, so they would set up their training differently to stimulate those pathways. You get more into that in 446 as well. And then another cause of hypertrophy could be increased connective tissue, meaning your tendons and ligaments will become stronger, which is why it's good for injury prevention. Okay, so this is not a sequence of events. This is not a list of steps. All 4 of these things are generally happening together to contribute to hypertrophy. Okay, so hypertrophy is usually a combination of these 4 adaptations. Okay, questions on that? No? Okay. Let me get to that. Okay, so then we need to talk about, why did I only get this far in my other class? What else did I go into? Okay, so muscle soreness. Let's talk about muscle soreness. I feel like I'm skipping something. Okay, I'm going to clear this. So take a screenshot real quick if you need to. Okay, so we have 2 types of muscle soreness. We will have acute muscle soreness, and we will have delayed onset muscle soreness. Okay, so acute muscle soreness, as the name suggests, occurs during the actual workout. So if you're doing a heavy lifting workout and your muscles are burning and hurting, what's that from?
Lactic acid.
Lactic acid.
It's lactic acid, the burning of the hydrogen from the lactic acid, your blood being acidic. So that's acute muscle soreness. It occurs during the workout, and it is temporary, right? When you stop exercising, when you stop doing the set, that soreness is going to go away pretty quickly. Okay, that discomfort. I just remembered what I went into in the other class before I went into soreness. Do you mind if I take a step back before I get into delayed onset muscle soreness? Back to what I was talking about with the myofibrillar hypertrophy versus the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. I wanted to give an example of that. So I'll come back to the soreness. So let's say you can lift, let's use a bench press as an example. Let's say you can press 100 pounds 10 times. Okay, so you do that, you take some rest, you do another set, 100 pounds 10 times. Take some rest, you do another set, 100 pounds 10 times. Take some rest, do another set, 100 pounds 10 times. That's your plan for your workout. Okay, let's say you do the first set, 100 pounds, 10 reps. You max out at 10 reps, assuming, okay, you're not going to stop at 10 because it's 10, but you could do 12. You're maxing out at 10. Okay, you rest, you come back for your second set, and you only get to 8. You take some rest. On your third set, you only get to 6. You take some rest, and on your fourth set, you only get to 5. What happened? Why can I only do 8 on this set?
Because you reached your max at 8.
But why is my max 8 here and my max 10 here? I know I'm strong enough to press this weight 10 times. Why couldn't I do it on this set?
Your glycolysis system didn't recover.
Okay, so the recovery wasn't long enough. Okay, probably a combination of PCR depletion and a little bit, I don't know how much lactic acid accumulation you'll get with 10 reps, maybe a little bit. But there's some kind of fatigue happening here, right? You can't do as many reps because you're fatigued, whether it's probably mostly PCR depletion, a little bit of lactic acid. So if you want to be able to do all 10 reps, you have to take a longer rest. Okay? There's nothing wrong with setting it up this way with a short rest, and then each subsequent set, you're going to be doing a little bit less work. Okay? That's fine. Or you could increase the rest so that each subsequent set you're able to get the full 10 reps in. Both are reasonable ways to set up the workout. Okay? Kind of like we talked about with the high intensity interval training. Sometimes you do it with a short recovery and the amount of work you can do in the work interval is going to gradually go down, or you give a longer rest interval and the amount of work you put out in each work interval is going to stay high. They're both reasonable ways to set up your resistance training program. But if the amount of work you're doing is going down, your fatigue is most likely due to hydrogen accumulation. You're most likely working in glycolysis. That's metabolic fatigue, which is more likely to lead to sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. Okay? If you rest longer, keep the work level higher, it's going to be more of a mechanical fatigue, and it's more likely to contribute to hypertrophy, myofibrillar hypertrophy. Does that kind of make sense? One's not bad, it just matters what you're trying to accomplish. If you just want to get bigger, sometimes do it one way, sometimes do it the other. Does that make sense?
Would you mind?
What if you want to, sorry.
Eddie, go ahead.
You mentioned that if the amount of reps goes down, that's metabolic fatigue, and that would contribute to what?
It's more likely to contribute to sarcoplasmic hypertrophy.
Thank you.
So they stimulate kind of different pathways. Each kind of fatigue stimulates different pathway. Dr. Nicole goes into that in a lot of detail in 446. Okay, any questions on that? The other thing I want to mention here, I need to make notes of this so I get in my other classes.
Can I ask one quick question?
Oh yes, go ahead, Cindy.
So the one that increases, you said it, I lost my question. Oh, you said it increases sarcoplasmic hypertrophy, it's like, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the other one increases myofibril. So the sarcoplasmic one, would that not increase strength? That's just size?
Well, you'll probably get some increases in strength from that, yes. I mean, you'll also get myofibrillar hypertrophy, but more of your hypertrophy is likely to come from sarcoplasm if you do it that way.
Say that again?
More of your, you're still going to get some myofibrillar hypertrophy and an increase in strength if you train that way. It's not that you're not going to get any increases in strength.
Okay.
It's just that more of your hypertrophy is likely to come from sarcoplasm.
Okay, and then the other way, you're more likely to get more strength than the other one.
Right, from the actin and myosin.
Okay, all right.
Yeah. So trying to think of these systems and these adaptations as black and white, like you're getting one, you're not getting the other. Like if your anaerobic system is on, it doesn't mean your aerobic system is off.
Right.
Your aerobic system is on, it doesn't mean your anaerobic system is off. If you're getting one adaptation, it doesn't mean you're not getting the other. Okay? Everything in our body is fluid and kind of working together. So when we talk about one system working or one adaptation working, it's just that's the primary one. It doesn't mean that the other ones aren't happening.
That's what I was going to ask. What's primary? Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So the next thing I wanted to ask was, Ismail, go ahead.
So what would you suggest if you are trying to keep your endurance to trying to maintain? So you're not trying to get bigger, you're not trying to get stronger, you're just trying to maintain your...
Well, you said endurance. Are you talking about strength or endurance?
That was my other question too in the beginning. I wanted to see if you can give us a definition between
yeah, so I don't usually
between endurance
spend
and
much time on that because that's terminology you should be learning before you get to me.
Right.
But it's also in chapter 9, which I don't spend time on because that's terminology you should learn before you get to me. But
Right.
Strength is the ability to produce a large amount of force. Endurance is the ability to maintain contraction over an extended period of time. Okay, so if you're trying to improve your strength, your maximal force production, you're going to be lifting heavy weights with less reps, 12 or less reps. If you're doing more than 12 reps, you're not going to get as much strength adaptation, you're going to get more endurance. So
Makes
that's
sense.
why
Makes
I
sense.
introduced this chapter by saying I'm assuming you're doing heavier resistance training, 12 reps or less. That's what I'm talking about when I refer to resistance training. You're not going to get much hypertrophy if you're doing more than 12 reps. Because the
Okay,
weight.
because that's what I usually do. I usually go from high to low or decrease the weight.
Mhm.
So
That's okay. I
trying
mean,
to
there's nothing
balance
wrong with
that
that.
out.
It's just going to get different adaptations. So it depends what your goals are.
Correct. Okay.
Okay, so my next
Makes
question
sense. Thank
is,
you.
if you train this way, the heavy resistance training, will it improve your 100-meter sprint speed?
I
Is
think
you guys who aren't going with 100 meters, is that a sprint?
100-meter sprint.
if you have
Yes.
yeah,
As Esmeralda's explaining why.
let's say an increase in myofibrils will help because you're increasing myofibrils, but I feel like it's kind of like the same with the example of like the 100 max rep, where shorter rest most likely lead to the sarcoplasmic hypertrophy. So I don't know how to explain it. I have it in my brain, but words can't come out.
Okay, so we're going to be spending a lot more time on questions like this on Monday. But if I'm asking you if this type of training will affect this type of performance, if your answer is yes, you need to name the adaptation that you're getting from this training and explain how it's going to affect this performance. Okay, so my question is basically, if you do resistance training, heavy resistance training, is it going to make you sprint faster?
Yes,
James, why?
because of hypertrophy. We have increased strength, which should also increase speed and power, right?
Right. So when we talked about high intensity interval training in the ATP PCR system and glycolysis, both of those caused hypertrophy, right? And what's secondary to hypertrophy? Strength, speed, and power, right? Strength, speed, and power, that's going to be an increase in an improvement in your 100-meter sprint time, right? So then you need to think about how resistance training is going to affect a 400-meter sprint time in glycolysis. You need to think about how resistance training might affect endurance performance on a 5-mile run, okay? But right now I want to ask you, is this resistance training going to affect your lactate threshold? I'll let you think about it for a moment.
I'm gonna say yes.
Okay, why?
Well, because let me think. Hold on. So the two things that come off the top of my head is lactic threshold. When you reach it, your muscles are burning and you're out of breath. When you lift heavy, you get to a point where your muscles are burning and you're out of breath for that set. So that's the only two things that came to mind.
Okay, so if your resistance training is largely in glycolysis, how will that affect lactate threshold?
I'm a pass.
James, Eddie, Sydney, Nick?
I mean, it would still be high intensity training because you're lifting heavy. So I would imagine that would cause you to produce more bicarbonate buffer and clear that lactic acid faster. So that would increase your lactate threshold.
Okay, you're right. The question is, okay, so if we're doing heavy resistance training, we're doing 12 reps or less, okay? Usually it's 6 to 10, okay? So, and that's maxing out at that number of reps. That's gonna be primarily in the ATP PCR system. Does training in the ATP PCR system affect your lactate threshold?
No.
It does not.
No.
It's possible you could be going a little bit into glycolysis during this and feeling burning and breathlessness at the end of your set. It's possible to do that, but the amount of time you're spending in glycolysis there is not really enough to trigger the bicarbonate buffer production. So you're not going to see very much increase in your bicarbonate buffer as a result of heavy resistance training. Okay, so you need to think about what effect that's going to have on your different performances, which we're going to talk about more next week. Okay, now I feel better that I remembered to cover that stuff. Any questions on any of that? Okay, now we can go back to our muscle soreness. Okay, perfect. So we talked about the acute muscle soreness. We need to go back to the delayed. Let me just type that out again. So the delayed onset muscle soreness is what you feel the next day. Sometimes it's 2 days later, usually the next day, 24 to 48 hours after a heavy resistance training workout. Most people think this is due to lactic acid accumulation. I will tell you right now, it is not. Okay, there could be a correlation when if you're sore, it's possible that the workout you did yesterday, you accumulated some lactic acid, felt some discomfort, some breathlessness, but that lactic acid did not cause the soreness. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now what caused the soreness. This is a 4-step process. I'm going to write out the steps for you, and then I'm going to go back and explain them. We'll see how far we get. Eccentric overload. Muscle damage. Inflammatory response. And repair. So a lot of people also think delayed onset muscle soreness is something to be avoided. Like, I don't want to lift heavy because I don't want to be sore. But muscle soreness is part of the process of creating hypertrophy. This is rebuilding the muscle, which rebuilds actin and myosin, which ends up making you stronger, right? So I kind of look at delayed onset muscle soreness as a good thing. Like, if I'm sore, I'm happy because it means the workout I did was effective. It means it's going to lead to some kind of adaptation. Okay, you don't have to have soreness to get hypertrophy, but especially in the beginning, it's really likely, and it's part of the hypertrophy process. So if someone is lifting light in an effort to avoid soreness, they should know that they're also going to avoid gaining strength and hypertrophy. Okay, so you have to kind of change the mindset regarding don't. Okay, so eccentric overload. I did not spend time covering concentric, eccentric, and isometric contractions because I assume that you guys have learned that already. The eccentric part of contraction is the lengthening. Okay, overload is in chapter 9. I expect that you guys know that already. But overload is basically challenging a muscle, working it more than you're used to. So, for example, like I said, if you're stopping at 10 reps because your trainer said 10 reps, but you could actually do 15 reps, you're not overloading. It's not challenging, it's easy. If you're doing something that's easy for your body, why would your body adapt? You're not going to trigger adaptations unless you challenge your body, okay, which is overload. So if you're at failure or near failure, that's overload and you're going to trigger adaptations. Okay, so eccentric overload means you need to challenge the muscle eccentrically. So your muscles can produce more force eccentrically than they can concentrically. So it's very difficult to challenge the muscle eccentrically because you're limited by what you can lift concentrically. So for example, the bench press, okay? Concentric on the way up, eccentric on the way down, right? You can lower more weight than you can lift because you're stronger eccentrically than you are concentrically. So you're limited by how much weight you can press. So it's difficult to challenge the eccentric movement because you're limited by how much you can lift concentrically. So, hold on, Cindy. The most effective way to get eccentric overload is through negative training. You guys heard of negative training? Negative training is a focus on the eccentric movement. In order to do that, you have to lift weight that's too heavy for you to lift concentrically. So on the bench press, you have to have more weight on there than you can press, which means you have to have someone helping you on the concentric movement, and then you lower the weight on your own. Someone helps you with the concentric movement, and you lower the weight on your own. Negative training, okay? You can do that yourself on something like a bicep curl. If it's too heavy for you to curl up, you can kind of swing your hips and help yourself, assist yourself on the way up, and then focus on the eccentric on the way down. If you've never trained that way before, try it. You probably don't have access to heavy weights or a partner right now, but next time you do, try it. I can almost guarantee you will be sore the next day, unless you normally train this way. If you don't normally train this way, it's gonna make you sore, which is a good thing because it's gonna make you stronger. It's gonna lead to hypertrophy, okay? So you don't have to do the focused negative training to get the muscle soreness and the eccentric overload, but that's just the most effective, efficient way to achieve it, okay? You get the same thing if maybe you started hiking now that we're in quarantine, you don't normally hike, and you've been hiking somewhere that has a lot of hills, and maybe your quads were sore. Your quads were sore from the downhill, not from the uphill, because the downhill is eccentric for your quads. So you overloaded the eccentric movement in your quads, which caused muscle soreness. Okay, let's go back here. So eccentric overload will cause muscle damage. This muscle damage is typically in the Z-disc and the plasma lemma. So let's go way back here. Where on here is the Z-disc? If I do it in a different color, it'll be easier to see. So. This is so hard to draw this way. Where on here is the Z-disc? What color is it?
Red.
Red. Okay. So these are the borders in between the sarcomeres. They support the actin. Okay. So if you have damage in your Z-disc, the actin is going to be less stable. Okay, because the Z-disc supports the actin. So if the actin is unstable, it's going to be harder to get cross bridges and power strokes. It's going to be harder to produce force. So if you do a heavy workout and you're sore the next day and you try to work out that muscle again, you will not be able to produce the same amount of force because this damage in the Z-disc will make it more difficult to get cross bridges and power strokes. You won't be able to produce as much force with a sore muscle, okay? What's the role of the plasma lemma in muscle contraction?
And they carry the action potential down to the sarcoplasmic reticulum.
That's the T-tubes. What's the plasma lemma do? Something binds to it.
Calcium. Does calcium bind to it?
Oh, acetylcholine.
Acetylcholine, remember, released into the neuromuscular junction, binds to the plasma lemma, which creates an action potential that travels down the T-tubes to the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Remember all that? So if the plasma lemma is damaged, it's going to stop some of those action potentials from being propagated. Less action potentials means less calcium release, means less cross bridges, less power strokes, less force production. So yet again, if you try to exercise on a sore muscle, with a sore muscle, you're not going to be able to produce as much force. Okay, you can work that muscle, you're just not going to be able to do as much work. So don't expect yourself to. The muscle's damaged. Questions on that?
Could you repeat one more time what happens when it's damaged?
The plasmalemma?
Plasmalemma. Mhm.
Yeah, so the plasmalemma normally has the acetylcholine binding to it, which triggers the action potential that goes down the T tubes, causes the release of calcium. So if the plasmalemma is damaged, fewer action potentials will get through. Okay, so just think about it. If the acetylcholine tries to bind here to the damaged plasmalemma, nothing's going to happen. So that action potential won't get propagated. Okay, if it binds over here, it's fine, but if it binds here, it won't. So some of the action potentials won't get through. So fewer action potentials means less calcium release, fewer cross bridges, fewer power strokes, less force production. Okay, then we have an inflammatory response, which is white blood cells basically coming in to the damaged area. They're going to start clearing out the debris from the damage, which irritates your nerve endings, which is why it hurts. So it's the inflammatory response that is causing the pain and discomfort.
Can you repeat that one more?
Yes, inflammatory response is white blood cells coming to the damaged area, clearing out the debris from the damage, which irritates your nerve endings and causes pain and discomfort. So the thing is, this inflammatory response, which causes discomfort, is part of the process of getting to the repair. And the repair is where we rebuild the actin myosin and possibly rebuild additional actin and myosin, which causes hypertrophy and increase in strength. If you take anti-inflammatories when you're sore, Advil, Motrin, anti-inflammatories, to dull this pain, and you're going to dull the inflammatory response, which is going to interrupt this repair process.
So
And you will get less hypertrophy if you take anti-inflammatories during your muscle soreness.
You just
And
blew my mind.
Dr. Nicole goes into detail about that in 446. Super interesting. So the repair process is also regulated by the white blood cells, and it's the rebuilding of the parts that were damaged, okay, which is part of what contributes to increased actin and myosin filaments. Like when you break a bone and the bone repairs itself to be stronger than it was before, you damage the muscle, it repairs itself to be stronger than it was before.
So
Okay,
when
so
we
this process can take a couple of days. Go ahead.
have this, we just have to like muscle through and continue to walk like Bambi. Like there's nothing we can do to like make the pain go away or.
Well, that's an interesting question. The debate between ice and heat.
Okay.
You can ice a sore muscle. The thing with ice, are any of you in the athletic training option? Nobody in the athletic training option? Okay, so I usually have those people step up here because those people study ice versus heat a lot. So the idea of icing is a temporary release of discomfort, basically numbs you. So you can ice a sore muscle. It'll take away the pain and discomfort while you have the ice on it. When the ice comes off, pain and discomfort is going to come back. But the thing is that the ice decreases blood flow to the area. And if you want the inflammatory response and repair process to happen, you need to increase blood flow to the area. So heat is actually going to be more helpful in this process than ice.
So what about like massage, like rolling it out?
Massage, yeah. So massage and the
Stretching.
myofascial release, that all increases blood flow.
Got
And
it.
the increase in blood flow is going to help this process along. Absolutely.
Perfect.
I have a
Stretching helps me too.
Stretching, okay.
Yeah.
Esmeralda, you have a question?
Caroline did.
Oh, I did.
Esmeralda has her hand up.
Oh, okay, she can go.
Is that all gonna affect hypertrophy too, or?
You mean the heat and the massage?
Yeah.
It speeds up this process. So it's not going to interrupt the process like anti-inflammatories would interrupt the process. Heat is going to speed up the process. So it might help you recover faster. Yeah. Caroline, you have another question?
Yeah, so like after double days, it would be mandatory that we would do like ice baths or some sort of that and not heating. So would you say it should be heating instead of like ice baths or some type of icing then?
You know
Or is
what?
that different for like athletes?
Most coaches love ice baths. Love them. The research on their effectiveness is very flimsy.
That's good.
So, yeah. So you can try to look up some research and show it to your athletic trainers and coaches and see what they have to say. But
yeah.
I know that an NC2 athlete trying to argue with their trainers is
probably not going to go very well.
not the best idea. Yeah, I know all about that. So yeah, because I have issues with the stuff they make my daughter do all the time. Okay, any other questions on that? 143. Okay, so we're almost done. We have 2 lecture sessions left. They're both scheduled as reviews. What's going to happen is I'm not quite done. I need to talk about immobilization and detraining, which is going to be really quick. And I want to talk about weight control, which is going to be really quick. So there'll be a little bit of new information coming at you on Monday, and then we'll start reviewing. But my review is not going to be Jeopardy style review like it was for the other exams. This review is going to be more of talking about how to apply the concepts, talking about how to integrate the older material with the newer material. And the beginning of that, I have this table called Energy Systems. I don't know if you guys can see that. So if you go on Canvas, under modules, in the first module, there's a table that says, should say Energy Systems table or something like that. So what it is I have each energy system listed, ATP, PCR, I don't know if you guys can see this, glycolysis, aerobic, and then all the different things we learned about it. The location, the enzymes, the how you train it, the adaptations, the causes of fatigue, the ATP count, all the different things we learned about the systems down here. So I would love it for you to fill this out to the extent you can before you come in on Monday. And then I will spend some time on this. But I'd love for you to have it mostly filled out, and then I'll help you with the parts you have trouble with. Okay, and then we'll talk about integrating all the material. Sound good? Okay, don't forget to study this newer information, because what happens a lot of times is we get to the end and we get excited about integrating everything and reviewing the old stuff, and people forget to study the neural adaptations and the causes of hypertrophy and DOMs and all that. So don't forget to actively be studying that, and your table. Important. Okay, so I will stick around if you have any quick questions. Otherwise, I will see you guys on Monday or in my office hours tomorrow.
Awesome. Thanks, Professor.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right, no questions. Luis, you're going to stick around for a minute? Is your sound working today?